Man, I am on a roll. This is 2 weeks in a row where I fucked up the recording of the podcast. So typically what I do is I have a camera that I record for YouTube, and then I will also just, post the audio on Spotify and iTunes and all that. I don't know what is going on, but I cannot get my shit together for whatever reason. I cannot. Anyway, so I now have a redundant backup recorder for the audio, and then we're also doing the video. So let's see if I finally got this figured out. Okay, this week is a little bit of a continuation from last week's episode where we talked about some fund questions that we had from, a listener that emailed in. This is going to probably be a fairly short episode, but I wanted to briefly cover some of the mistakes that I made when I set up my fund and I filed my Form D with the SEC's website. You probably know by now if you've listened to a couple episodes of the podcast, but I did set up my fund myself. I did that mainly to save $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $80,000, which is just insane, the prices that I'm hearing from different attorneys. If you're an attorney, come at me, bro. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because sometimes I get it, right? Like there's a place, there's a need for it. If you don't want to take the time to learn all this stuff yourself, cool, absolutely. Like there is a place for an attorney, but it doesn't cost anything to set up a fund. So for what it's worth. Okay. Now, having said that, I did make some mistakes, and I have learned from those mistakes, and I'm now passing that information on to you just because I don't want you to make the same mistakes. Okay, so if you're interested in learning about how we did that, go back to episode 7 of the podcast. I go over everything, breaking down how to set up a fund. That being said, when you go to set up a fund on the SEC's website, once you finally get access to Edgar and all the other hoops that they make you jump through, which is honestly kind of a nightmare, you'll finally get to the place where you can submit and file your Form D for your Reg D filing. And it is not a great user experience, I will say that. Coming from a software background, my professional career was in tech. I really nerd out on good user interfaces and good user experiences. And the SEC's website is not that, because it looks like it was built in the early 2000s and probably has not been touched since then. So it's not great. Anyway, all that to say, item number 1 that I would fix and change when you're going through the SEC's website, it's fairly straightforward, right? You put in your issuer name and your email and address and all that kind of stuff. Then you click next and it'll take you item number 2, and then you fill out the next pieces, and you hit next and you go to number 3. On item number 9, it asks you to enter the fund type, and it's multiple choice, which I don't know that it should be. I take that back. It's fine, but I think most people should select one of these options. This was the mistake that I made. Item number 9, it allows you to select what type of fund you are setting up. And there's debt fund, there's equity fund, there's pool investment fund. There's a bunch of different options. There's 20 different options in there. I mistakenly selected both pooled investment fund and debt fund. And logically, in my mind, that made sense, because that's what a fund is, right? You're pooling capital from multiple investors, you're sticking it in one account, and then you kind of have autonomy and deploy it as you see fit. I won't go into the details, but that has caused me some grief marking pooled investment fund. So I have since amended my Form D, and now we have just selected debt fund, because that's all it is. And we don't have an equity fund because we're not offering any equity in the ownership entity, the LLC that operates and manages the fund. It's just a debt fund. I would say probably 90% of, unless you're doing something really complicated or outside of the box, if you are a hard or private money lender, chances are you're going to have a debt fund. That's what you're doing, right? Is you're issuing these debt instruments so that you can leverage this capital to issue private real estate notes. That's fundamentally what you're doing. So unless you're doing something super weird, strange, outside of the box, just select debt fund. Don't select anything else. Okay, item number 2 that I messed up, and this is obviously it's my bad because I did it, but I also believe that this is just kind of a poor user experience, user interface issue like I talked about before with the SEC's website. Moving on, you get to item number 12 on the Form D, and it's for sales compensation. And sales compensation, the way that it works with a fund or anytime you're raising capital, you have to have what is called a broker-dealer license. And this is a registration that you have to go through, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. And honestly, it's kind of a nightmare, and most people don't do it because of the complexity to do that. And basically, it allows you to legally be compensated for raising capital inside of a fund. Unless you are a licensed broker-dealer, you cannot raise capital and be compensated for raising capital. So say, for example, you cannot go out and solicit for somebody else and say, hey, if I bring you $100,000, I want you to pay me 2% or 5% of whatever the raise is as sales compensation. You can't do that. Now, if you are a GP of the fund itself, you don't have to have a broker-dealer license to do that. It's only when you have outside compensation. Same thing goes for like referral fees and all that kind of stuff. You can't do that. Now, going back to the SEC's website, when you're filling out the item number 12 for sales compensation, it's very confusing, at least in my opinion, to navigate past this because it won't, if you don't have a licensed broker-dealer license, it just shows like an empty box for sales compensation and who's going to get compensated for raising funds in the fund. There was no way to just click next and bypass this. It just showed like the name of the person and whether or not they have a license and all that kind of stuff. Because I couldn't just click next to get past that, what I ended up doing was just putting myself in there because logically I was like, well, I'm getting compensated, right? Indirectly, like we are raising capital for the fund. And even though I'm the GP on the fund, like I'm still like, there's a reason why I'm doing this, right? Like the reason I'm raising capital is so I can lend out more capital so that indirectly we make more money, right? So I put myself down as receiving sales compensation. That caused a lot of heartache because when we went and did our Blue Sky filings and we filed with the individual states, what happened was it showed me as receiving compensation and then it said, okay, well, what's their broker-dealer license number? Which I obviously didn't have. So I had a bunch of the states reaching out and saying, hey, unless you can provide us with this, like we're going to have to reject this and this is going to be a nightmare anyway. So all that to say, when you are filling out item number 12, there is a button in the bottom left-hand corner of the current existing website as of the time of this recording that says add and remove. You can just hit remove and it will remove that requirement and then you can bypass step number 12. In hindsight, again, it's still, I feel like it's a really shitty layout. Anyway, all that to say, you can remove it. Just go down to the bottom left-hand corner and then hit remove, and then you can bypass and move on to item number 12. Unless, of course, you are working with licensed broker-dealers and they will receive compensation for doing such, then, of course, absolutely, you could do it that way. So keep that in mind. Item number 12, do not put sales compensation. Don't put yourself as receiving sales compensation unless you are a licensed broker-dealer. Okay, last but not least, this is not necessarily specific to the Form D as I was filling this out, and I did talk about this in last week's episode, so feel free to skip this if you're not interested. But I did have an issue early on where our investor website was too optimistic. Like I said, I talked about this last week, but I think it's kind of in the scope of this, so it's worth re-mentioning. When I originally set up the fund, we set up our website to raise capital, and you're welcome to go and take a look at that. It's holbrookcapital.com/invest. Just a simple website, just a one-pager showing like how the fund works, frequently asked questions, expected returns, examples of past projects, all the above. In the past, I was too optimistic, saying that like this is a great opportunity. This is a good way to make yields in kind of a low yield market since COVID. And I would have investor testimonials of actual investors in the fund saying this was a good experience. I had no issues. I haven't lost any money. The SEC did not like that. Mainly because even though I personally believe that this is a very low risk opportunity, meaning that like we are lending against a hard physical asset that we can go and touch, and we have excessive collateral. Oftentimes we'll have cross collateral. And on top of that, the borrowers who are coming to us are going to bring some sort of a down payment as well. So the LTVs are relatively low, 65, 70, 75% max. In my opinion, that is a very good investment. I see that as being incredibly low risk because we're not purchasing these properties at retail value. Typically, when you're buying a fix and flip home, like it has some sort of value add component intrinsically. And then on top of that, when a borrower brings a down payment, you're talking like 50% LTV based off, retail value. So I see that as an incredibly safe investment. We have first lien position. And in the event that something happens, like a borrower defaults, we can foreclose. So we take the property back and we get all their equity and. So it, in my opinion, is a very safe investment. That being said, the SEC did not like that. So I would say just be incredibly neutral on your investor website. And you can see all those little, caveats and asterisks that I put on our website. So for example, I have a calculator on our investor website that says, if you put this much in at this rate of return for this year's and you let it compound, it should, roughly reach this value. Keep in mind though, that like I put a little asterisk now that says like, based on ideal conditions and past historical returns, which are not to be, expected as future returns or whatever the verbiage is. I made it sound better on the website, but essentially I said look, this is a risky investment. There is an opportunity for the market to decline. There is an opportunity to lose money. Historical returns are not an expectation of future profits. Just be very explicit that look, these are the pros. I do believe that this is a good investment, but these are all the downsides as well. So I feel like I'm getting kind of long-winded in this, but basically just be neutral. Show the pros, show the cons, and you'll be totally fine. So that concludes this episode. Hopefully that makes sense, but some of the mistakes that I made early on, and hopefully you don't make those mistakes too. So that's it for this week's episode. We will catch you next week.